On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Donalda. And Donalda was married to an entitled physical abuser. It's a story of control, rage, accusations, weaponizing therapy, and the loss of identity. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Donalda. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Well, thank you for being here. And if you want to be a guest like Donalda is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, there's a button that says guest form. When you click on that button, it takes you to our guest form page, and there you can read all of our instructions and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button. And please do send it in the format that we ask for. And for today's episode, we have a content warning, and we do discuss physical abuse, sexual coercion, child sex abuse, and animal abuse in this episode. So that is your content warning for today. And you're going to hear Donalda's story today, and Donalda's story is one that slowly escalates until she doesn't recognize herself anymore. It's something that's not an easy thing to talk about, so a big thank you to Donalda for sharing with us, and I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Donalda, the floor is now yours.
So I was born into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, known as Mormons. But my parents, my dad was a therapist and my mom was an early childhood educator, and I was the firstborn. So my early life was one big series of tests. My parents were teaching me to think things through, to question everything, and I had a natural love for just the world and trying to understand how things worked. And I would always had my nose in some project like collecting ants or climbing trees or something like that. But when I was about 3, kind of a good story to illustrate this. When I was 3 years old, my mom was teaching me to write my name, and I couldn't get one of the letters right. And I got so upset. I actually remember this. I was hitting my head against the table and she had to ban me for a week from writing my name. It's such an embarrassing story, but it happened. And so that's just kind of, I was a perfectionist. I had to get everything just right. I love to read. I was reading Dr. Seuss by the time I was 3 when my brother was born. And my dad ended up joining the military. And so we had these tiny little libraries. And I was always so bored and wanting to read. I would read out the entire library. There were no books left. And so I'd check out like 15, 20 books on a Friday and turn them all back in on Monday. When I was 6 is when my dad joined the military, and we ended up living in Europe for 6 years of my life between the ages of about 8 to 14. So a lot of my culture and history is very European oriented. We didn't have television. We had canned TV. So it was old. I grew up watching I Love Lucy and stuff like that. I was about 7 years old when I really started taking my faith seriously, ended up getting baptized in my church, and just really took doing the right thing seriously. I wanted to always do the right thing. And even if that hurt me or I didn't get something out of it. Ended up going through school pretty quickly. I graduated at 17. I graduated college at 20 and served a church mission, which is kind of what leads us into the story. Near the end of my mission, I got a new mission leader who was very strict, and there were a lot of missionaries that were complaining about some of the things happening. So they would come to me because I had been there the longest at this point, and I would talk to the mission president because he really liked me for some reason, and I would tell him, "Hey, these things are happening. Missionaries aren't happy." And so he ended up calling me into his office, and I took a 3-hour train ride to get to the mission office. And he sat there and told me that he didn't think that I could handle it anymore, that I needed to go home soon, that the stress of the mission was getting to me. And because I took myself so seriously about doing the right thing, and I was teaching people who wanted to learn about the gospel, I was serving people, doing things for them in the area that I was in, it just really upset me. And so I basically just bent over backwards and I was like, no, I need to stay. I'll do whatever you want. And that kind of set me up. I had gone from being a very bright, inquisitive, no nonsense kind of kid to being in a mindset where I was very compliant and willing to do what I was told and trusted other people's experiences and perspectives before my own.
So within this situation that you're in, was there something about the tone or the person that was very convincing to you? Or was it just the threat of everything being taken away that was just kind of shocked your system? Did you feel like, I'm a bad person? Did all of a sudden you start questioning who you were? Did you think that, you being a perfectionist, I failed at something come in? Like, did you look at this person who was telling you this as this like respected authority and like, now you're bad? And in hindsight, were they protecting people or an organization that shouldn't be protected, and how these things were going on, and you were really doing the right thing?
That's an excellent question. I think looking back at it, a lot of it had to do with the fact that my first mission leader and my second mission leader knew each other and I don't think they got along. The first one was an internist and the second one was a surgeon. So they were both doctors, both brilliant, but in very different ways. And if you've ever been around a surgeon, they like to go in, cut out the problem, get it out, no nonsense, no messing around, no kindness or softness, and you need that as a surgeon. But with me, I think I was trying to do the right thing. And because I was trying to do the right thing, I got in trouble for it. And all of the goals that I had and all of the feelings that I had about what the right thing to do was undermined. I could lose it all. And yeah, I wasn't perfect. I wasn't making a mistake, And so I just got really quiet so I could finish out what I felt like I needed to do while I was out there.
So eventually you do come home from this mission. And what is your life like right when you come home? And where and when do you meet the person that this story is about?
So I think it probably starts on the way home with all of the missionaries that are going home, that what we call a transfer. So that set of missionaries meet together in the mission office in the mission leader's home, and just kind of have a little party, watch Disney movies, eat food, relax before they go home. And they give us all of the mail that we hadn't gotten from our family. This was before internet. I mean, pretty much before internet. So it was all paper mail. And I was going through my letters and I had one from my dad, and I had just worked hard and I had a really difficult mission. The people who were the members who were there didn't like missionaries. And so it was just a very difficult mission. I'd worked myself to the bone to try to do the right thing again. And I had this letter from my dad, and he was like, hey, as soon as you get home, you need to get a job. And I just broke down crying because I was so exhausted and so thin, And so I got home, and that was pretty much the first thing out of his mouth. You need to get a job. And so before my mission, I had been a professional graphic designer. And where my parents were stationed at the time, there really wasn't a lot of work like that. And so I ended up taking a retail job working at a copy center. When I did that, I got home a couple of days before Christmas, and before February, I think it was end of January, I got a job working retail. And so it was like, boom, boom, boom. I went from this very insulated world to now I was working retail. A lot of people, definitely not the protected world I had been in before. He was an assistant manager there. And pretty quickly, my mindset was just I wanted to make friends. I knew I was going to move back to where I had lived before my mission. I wanted to make friends, kind of have a little bit of fun, relax, get out of my shell of being a missionary. And there was kind of a vibe there. Very quickly, I started picking up on a weird vibe. And at first, I had no idea what was going on. Slowly, things came out where it turned out that pretty much every woman in that store, the manager, the other assistant manager, one of my coworkers, they all had a history with him. And they were, I don't know, kind of treating me weirdly because I guess he was interested in me almost from the beginning and I had no idea. I was clueless. And so it was like this competition vibe that I had never had before because that's not what my friends are like, And so I was kind of clueless through the whole thing. He was talking to my coworker one day and it was behind the copy center desk. So I was right there and he was talking to her and trying to convince her to come play D&D, Dungeons and Dragons with him. And I'd always been kind of interested in it. I had a friend that was into it. And so I was like, hey, that sounds like fun. He ended up inviting me. We became friends, I guess you could call it. I met his friends. I met the people he'd been living with and they were great. But I just thought I was making friends. And looking back, I think, like I said, he was into me almost from the beginning and I just didn't realize it. And so I didn't respond to him the way he was used to being responded to. And so I think that just kind of intrigued him more. It made him more focused on me. Of course, at the time, I didn't know. And as we were talking and getting to be friends, he mentioned that he'd had a friend who was LDS Mormon before, and he'd always been interested in learning about the religion. And of course, I was a missionary, so I knew exactly what to do. I invited him over to my parents' house, and he started listening to the information about my church at my house, and he got baptized pretty quickly. And this whole time frame, he was also separated from his wife, who I'd never met. He was separated from her before I ever met him, and so he was in the process of getting a divorce from her when I met him. And so he also ended up finalizing that divorce and getting baptized pretty much within the same month.
So when it comes to joining the Mormons, getting baptized, I don't know much about the Mormons. Is it patriarchal?
Yes, it's gotten better. But it still has a long way to go. And it's very interesting because when you start diving into Mormon history, it's actually very progressive for its era. It was established in 1830, so early 1800s. And when they came to Utah, they really, they were very pro women's vote. And of course, depending on who you talk to, I could get into that way too much for this podcast, but it's nefarious, but it's also not nefarious. So yeah, it's very patriarchal, but it has gotten better recently.
And when it comes to him wanting to join, what are the selling points for him? Like, why is he excited to become a Mormon? Like, how does it fit into who he is?
So I think there are two answers to that. The first one is the one that I thought was the answer at the time. I was very sensitive to not wanting him to join the church because of me. Because by the time he was baptized, I had an idea that he was interested in me. And so I kind of distanced myself from the whole process and kept turning him back to talk to the missionaries and not to me about certain things. But he told me that he'd always liked his friend who was Mormon, loved the fact that she didn't drink or smoke or do any of that stuff. He wasn't a smoker. He wasn't a drinker either. And just really liked the clean living is kind of how he sold it. Always wanted to have the white picket fence and the dog and the two kids kind of idea. And just that's what attracted him to it from what he said. He also told me that he had an addiction, a sex addiction. And he really wanted to get rid of that. And he felt that joining the Mormon church and being a man of God would help him, I guess, release himself from that addiction. And that was the part that I was like, okay, go talk to the missionaries about that. Don't talk to me about that. That's not my business. But yeah, that's what he said. Looking back, I think you're getting on a very good track there. I think he liked the patriarchal side of it. I think he thought of Mormon women as being submissive, which anyone who knew me up until that point in my mission, that is not the category I fell into at all. But I think he thought that we were just naturally submissive and willing to follow our husbands, you know? So I think that had something to do with it.
And okay, so you were about to tell a story that I interrupted you. Where was that going to begin?
So we were talking late at night, which we did quite often. And he said, you know what? I need you to come over here. I've got something to tell you. And I'm exhausted. I'm in my pajamas in bed and I'm just like, okay. But again, I really had this attitude of wanting to be nice to people and be there for people. And so I got up out of bed, got dressed, drove over to his house. It was about a 20-minute half-hour drive. Got over there and he invites me in and he just starts talking about how he's been attracted to me from day one, how he didn't want to be attracted to me because he already had enough complication in his life, and how he fought against it. And all of these, he just went on for 2 hours. And I sat there and I nodded my head. I was like, didn't say a word other than that. And at the end, he finally kind of wound down in his diatribe. And I just looked at him. It was 1:00 in the morning by this time. I am like Cinderella. I turned into a pumpkin after midnight. My brain was gone. And I just looked at him and I was like, okay, well, thank you for telling me. And I got up and I left. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that because it just was not very nice. But looking back at it, I think it threw him off. Like he didn't know what to do about that. He was expecting me to fall all over myself and be like, okay, great. And I just didn't give him that reaction. And I think, again, that kind of intrigued him more rather than like a normal person would get turned off by that. I think for him, that kind of drew him in. Later on, we had a discussion about it. And I told him, I thought about what he'd said. I prayed about it, which is important in my faith. Talked to my parents, talked to other people, friends about it. And finally just felt like, okay, well, this is an okay relationship to pursue. I didn't really feel attracted to him per se. But it felt like it was like, let's go ahead and pursue this relationship, but not until after he's baptized. And so I went to him and I just said, well, right now I'd like to stay friends, but maybe we can try dating in, a few weeks or a month or something like that. So he ended up getting baptized, and we went on a couple dates, and I was still gonna move back to where I'd been living. And he started making plans to move also. And the night before I left, we were sitting on the beach, and he's just started saying, like, fumbling around himself. He's like, I really like you. I love you. I want to be with you forever, kind of stuff. I like, because in the Mormon church, eternal marriage is very important. What we call eternal marriage, which means that you're married here and in the afterlife. And so he really liked that idea. So I just was like, are you asking me to marry you? And he was like, well, yeah, I guess so. And I'm like, okay, yes, I'll marry you. So we got engaged. Didn't really tell anybody right away. Waited until I went ahead and moved in with my sister. We were roommates for about a year. And he came and moved out with us about a month after I moved. And then that's when we told everybody that we were engaged.
And what did your parents think about him?
Well, it's kind of funny because at the time, they didn't dislike him, but they didn't really like him either. He has a tendency when there's a family group or a group of people, if he's not the center of attention, he'll just leave. And so it was a little off-putting to them. But they never said anything to me about it. When I told them that we were engaged, they were like, okay, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I said yes. And they know that I'm pretty, when I make a decision to do something, I'm pretty set on doing it. And so they didn't even say anything to me other than that. But they didn't like him much. In fact, the only family member that he got along with was my sister.
And why did they get along?
You know, it's funny. I don't know because you would think that they would, but they were both kind of into cars. They were both really into movies. She was kind of she would probably get mad at me for saying this, but she was kind of a not like other girls kind of girl, a little bit on the punk side of things. And I think they would just joke around and hang out a lot in that year that we were engaged. And so they got to be pretty good friends.
So you end up being engaged for a whole entire year, and eventually you do get married, and then you move in with him. So what are the first, I guess, 2 years of your marriage like?
So he was in the apartment he was in the same apartment building that we were in, but in a different apartment until we got married. And then he basically just switched with my sister. So she got his apartment and he moved in with me. The first 2 years were kind of rough. We were in that apartment for about a month, and then our lease was up and we wanted to find a different place. And so I ended up finding an apartment, and so we started to get ready to move in, and he wanted his best friend to move in with us. And I was very uncomfortable with that idea. You know, again, sheltered. I didn't think I was sheltered at the time, but I was sheltered. And so I would go from never having lived with a man that I wasn't related to living with two men that I wasn't related to. And I mean, he was a nice guy. He's a really good guy. I'm still in contact with him a little bit. But because they got along so well, it was the relationship for that first bit was really more between him and his friend. And I was kind of just a side character. I would go to work, I'd come home, there'd be, coffee stains everywhere or mess everywhere. I'd clean that up, and then I'd go to bed and get up and go to work. Yeah, it was kind of just like a ghost in my own life in a way that first year.
And then eventually for you here, sex with him becomes an issue. So walk us through what happened here.
Yeah. So I was a virgin when I got married, like most people in my church should be. That's kind of what we believe in. And when we had sex, I was expecting some pain because I'd been taught to expect that, but it was agonizing. And the first time, this is possibly TMI, but the first time I asked him to stop and he stopped. And I was just shaking. My whole body was shaking because of how much it hurt. And so the next night though, he had to talk with me and basically said, oh, it's going to hurt and it's not going to stop hurting until we just finish it. And so he started doing it. It became more than I could handle. And just so you know, I have a pretty high pain tolerance in general. So it was pretty bad. And so he just went ahead and did it. And I was bleeding a lot. It was really painful. And that's just kind of how it was for the next 2 years of our marriage. It would hurt really, really bad. I mean, it wasn't as bad as the first time, but it would still really be agonizing. But he, I was kind of taught to believe that men needed sex, and it was something that wives had to give their husbands, whether they wanted to or not. And so I just did, but it ended up becoming kind of an ongoing problem with him because he didn't feel like it was ever enough. And when it hurt me and I let that show, he would kind of pout. And I don't know how else to describe it. He'd kind of withdraw and just kind of pout to himself. And so I started just ignoring the fact that it hurt me and trying to, bite down and let it happen. And eventually I did end up talking to a gynecologist who explained what was going on. It's called vaginismus, and it's a thing that can be worked through. So I was trying to work on it, but it didn't really go away until my oldest was born. And then after she was born, I healed up. It was fine. So at least that didn't keep going.
And eventually you do get pregnant and the roommate moves out of your home. And what happens from here?
So he ended up moving in with my brother, the roommate did, and we still saw them almost every weekend. We were still playing D&D as a group, and there was always a lot of contention between my brother and my husband. And so my husband would come to me and complain about my brother, and my brother would come to me and complain about my husband. And I would try to kind of talk them both. I would play mediator. I tried to talk them both down. And interestingly enough, that actually comes to play later in the divorce. But my ex roommate ended up becoming like best friends with my brother. That's why I still have contact with him, is because they're best friends and have been for 15 years or more at this point. After we got pregnant, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, what was the contention about?
It was just various things with D&D, like, oh, this rule is that rule, and we shouldn't have done that, or you should have done that. I mean, just ridiculous stuff, honestly. But it was kind of constant. And interestingly enough, he kind of got that way about all of my people, because I had friends that were kind of scattered all over because of growing up in the military. My friends weren't local. They lived everywhere. And whenever I would contact my friends or call them or talk to them or my family, he would always just kind of act upset about that. He would sulk, for lack of a better word. And so I would gradually just not contact people as much. All of our friends ended up kind of being his friends. Other than the fact that I had a lot of extended family in the area. And so he couldn't really completely get rid of them. But there were several things that happened to try to drive them away from us as well.
So eventually you're pregnant here and you start to see some rage. Rage begins, and escalations happen once year 3 happens. So walk us through what starts to transpire.
Yeah, so he had never really gotten angry with me as long as we had the roommate there. He did get angry at my roommate a couple times, but not me. It was right after my roommate moved out, and we were carpooling to work because we both worked in the same area of the city. And we were talking about genetics, and I graduated. I was a graphic designer, worked as a graphic designer, but my major was veterinary science. And so genetics was one of my favorite aspects of that. And I had actually been planning on getting my advanced degree in genetics. And so he said something that wasn't quite accurate. I don't remember what it was, but he said something that wasn't quite accurate. And I said, well, actually, this is the way it works. And he said, no, it doesn't. I saw it on Nova once. And I'm like, well, I have a degree in that. And that was kind of like an interest of mine. So I think I kind of know how it works, And he got so angry with me. And I was trying to be soft because I didn't very often disagree with him. But he got so angry about that he started swerving all over the highway and actually went onto the shoulder for a bit. And I was just holding on for dear life, terrified. I'd never had anyone who acted like that. And he ended up, I can't remember if I apologized or not, but he ended up calming down and we just went to work like nothing happened. And then after work, we never brought it up again. But that was probably the first time that I got really scared of what he would do.
Consciously or unconsciously, he made a point for you to hear or understand about who he is. So what are some other escalation points that start occurring here during this pregnancy?
Well, one thing that had been an ongoing problem in our marriage, I was talking about friends that I had had. I had a friend who was an online friend that I had known since I was 18. Before we were even dating, I told him once that this guy reminded me of him because they both had said something very similar. And I was laughing about it and said, hey, you guys kind of remind me of each other. And he looked at me and he said, and this was a huge red flag if I had recognized it at the time. He looked at me and he said, this guy is not good for you. He's no good for you. He might even be dangerous. You need to cut off ties with him. And I remember thinking at the time, I didn't even know this guy. Like, I didn't even know him. And he's trying to tell me who I should be friends with. And I just kind of laughed it off. I was like, oh, yeah, haha, very funny. And didn't think much of it. Well, as our relationship developed, I would mention it. I would say something like, oh, hey, I talked to this guy and this is how he's doing. And he would get angry. He's like, I thought I told you not to talk to that person. And I would just say, well, he reached out to me. You know, I'm not going to just not respond. That's not very nice. And so it ended up becoming an ongoing problem where he thought that I agreed to stop talking to this guy. And I just thought I just didn't take it seriously. Because I've never had anyone try to tell me who I could talk to or who I couldn't talk to. And it just didn't occur to me that that's what he was doing. And so when I was about 5 months pregnant, it happened again. And I had had a discussion with my husband about this. And I said, look, we're just friends. I've never even met him face to face. It's never going to go anywhere. And I would be happy if you would be friends with him too, you know, get to know him. Maybe you can talk to him yourself. And so he did talk to him a little bit. And I thought everything was okay. Well, about the 5-month mark of my pregnancy, this guy reaches out to me again and he got angry at me about it. So I sent this guy messages saying, hey, I can't talk to you anymore. That's it. I'm not going to respond to any more emails. And then I kind of vented about it in my online journal. And he found out about that venting and got so angry that he raged. He punched a wall. We had a fog machine that he broke. He threw it out the door and broke it. I had a basket that I had bought to just like store snacks in, and he broke that. And he got so angry, he kind of started coming at me. And so I ran out the door and down the street a little bit. And here I am, literally barefoot and pregnant, you know, out in the middle of the street. I stopped because I realized I have no keys. This was before cell phones were really that much of a thing. And so I had no phone. I had no way to contact anybody. And so I just stood there in the middle of the street for like probably a full minute or two, not knowing what to do. And he comes out of the house and he starts kind of palms down, talking to me, trying to calm me down. And like, it's okay. You can come back in the house. And I said, I'm not coming back in the house unless we call our pastor. So he's like, okay, we'll call the pastor. So I go back in, we call the pastor, and he sends a couple of guys from the congregation over to talk to us. And I don't remember much about what they said, except for the fact that they were very uncomfortable, had no idea what to say. And we're just kind of sitting there. And I was mostly silent. I didn't say much because I was still scared. And so the entire narrative about what had happened came out of my husband's mouth. And I just remember feeling very outnumbered almost, because here I am sitting in a room with 3 guys. I'm still kind of shaking. And it turned out that my pastor kind of gave us some free counseling, some free therapy, couples therapy. So we went to that. But yeah, that was the first strange, like really scary situation that I had. He didn't put hands on me, but I was afraid he was going to.
So it's a lot of anger. There's intimidation going on with the punching of walls, the breaking of things. You're chased out of the home. And then your church sends you to counseling. Does your ex want to go to counseling? What were the conversations like if you did go? You know, what happened inside there? And did you also maybe go to counseling by yourself, or did you also just go with him?
Well, I'd actually been going to counseling by myself throughout the marriage. He would often tell me that I was depressed. And so I would go to EAP counseling, which is just a few sessions. And I'd say, I seriously think I'm depressed. And they would talk to me for a couple of sessions and they're like, no, you're fine. You just got a difficult situation. You're newly married, or whatever the situation was at the time. And so I just kind of thought, okay, I'm not depressed, at least. That was validating. But it wasn't until, so one thing to understand too about our church, I use the term pastor, but they're not a paid clergy. They have no training. They're just like a random guy. It's a neighbor of yours that gets called to this calling. to what we call a calling. They're appointed to this role to guide the congregation. And so they don't know what they're doing. And it's
and it sounds better when you say, the pastor came by and gave us church paid couples counseling instead of some random guy came by
yes,
and gave us some church paid couples counseling.
Exactly. Yeah, it was his role. And they do have resources for our congregation leaders. But again, they have to know the resources there. They have to know the call, and they have a lot of roles. For someone who also has a day job, they're pretty busy. And so again, it's just, they don't always know what to do. And that was the case in my case. He just didn't really know what to do about it. It was actually better later on. I would get a bishop who'd had a brother that he insisted was unjustly accused of abuse. And that was much worse than ignorance. That was rough. But yeah, so they gave us couples counseling. It was through church services. So I don't think they do it at all anymore. But at the time, my church actually had paid therapists, just like any other therapy group that you could go to. But in retrospect, I kind of wish that we had not gone through that because families are so important in the church and eternal marriage is so important in the church. Their goal is really reconciliation. And, now I'm a little more savvy and I know that's not always the right thing to do with an abusive situation. In fact, usually it's not. And because, again, they're used to dealing with the usual problems where there's, his side, your side, and the truth. They don't always know what to do or didn't know what to do with I wasn't perfect. I definitely did things wrong in my marriage, but the conflicts that we were having were one-sided. I was doing everything I could to avoid conflict, and he was doing as much as he could to create it anytime that he didn't get what he wanted. And so the therapist would set up this idea of, okay, he's over here, you're over there. You need to compromise and move together and halfway. And so I would try to do that. I'd move halfway and I'd be like, okay, let's compromise. I will never talk to my friend again. And in return, I don't even remember what the return was. Like, don't get mad at me, I guess. I don't know. But I would do that and I would meet that halfway, but he wouldn't move. And then we'd go back and the therapist is like, okay, he's here and you're here. Now you need to move halfway. So then I'd be 75% the way over to his side. So it was a lot like that. And he loved, for someone who was initially very resistant to the idea of therapy, he loved therapy. He loved it. We would both walk in and I was kind of hopeful that maybe we could work on some stuff. And by the time we walked out, I was depressed and confused and he was bouncing off the walls, cloud nine. And a lot of it was because she was giving him vocabulary and justifying his behavior as you need to meet in the middle. And when it comes to an abuser and therapy, it's just almost never a good idea because you're not on an even playing field. And therapy, couples therapy especially, is generally geared towards two people on an even playing field. So it ended up being really rough.
So walk us through what happens when you have your first child.
So the earliest conflict after she was born that I remember is, again, he wanted to have sex almost right away. And the doctor said absolutely not within the first 6 weeks. I think I waited 4 weeks because he needed it so badly. He also started getting kind of distant with me. It was during this time that I got a phone call from a lady that asked for him. And I said, well, he's not here. And she's like, well, who's this? And I'm like, this is his wife. And she just hung up on me. And at the time I thought, well, that's weird. Of course, now I look back at that and I'm like, he was totally cheating on me, but there were a lot of comments. He'd come home from work and talk about how, oh, the ladies at work think I'm so amazing and think you're so lucky to have me. And I'm just, new mom, feeling really gross and ugly and unlovable and exhausted. But he would kind of rub that in a lot.
So is it fair to say that once you have the child here, that your attention is on the child and less on him, and he starts to act out more, gets attention from other people, and then also mentions what other people are saying about him and how lucky you are to know that you should be paying more attention to him and you should be doing what he wants, because the patriarchal values here now give him not carte blanche, but gives him an argument that is for you based possibly in your belief systems, or it's there in a way that's like, it's a lie, but there's a truth kind of going on at the same time. And even the therapy is going his way as well. So he's empowered in some way by this privilege that he has, and you're depressed, and that depression would be, and even though therapists are telling you you're not depressed, they're kind of saying it's situational, which there's situational depression. So, you're living in this world now here where it's really split, and like you want a family and he wants the family to pay attention to him. So how are you kind of thinking at this point?
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny you asked that, because I was the oldest of my parents, and growing up, my dad always kind of resented me, and I felt that. We were never that close, but my mom doted on me hand and foot. I was a rainbow baby, which means I was born after she'd had, I think, 3 miscarriages before me. And so she got really absorbed in me, and I was determined not to let that happen. And so I was so focused on trying to get him to be a parent and to do things, that's all I thought about. I didn't think about myself or how I felt. It was all about, we've got this person to take care of. I want you to develop a relationship with her also. And so could you change her diaper? Could you get her milk ready? Could you do these things? And it got to the point where he would do them. He would, but it was like he wanted a ribbon for it, And so I was just very much focused on trying to manage his relationship with our child and take care of the child at the same time. And I had forgotten about this, but this was also a time when he started getting different illnesses that had to be taken care of. So, and I went back to work full time about 6 weeks after having given birth. And so I was working full time, trying to take care of the baby. We had this plan for how she would be taken care of, and he decided not to do that. We were going to take turns so that I would go to work super early and he would go to work super late, and we wouldn't have to put her in daycare. But he said he couldn't work that late. And so we ended up having to put her in daycare. So I had to arrange that. And it was just constant work. And that's all I really remember about that time. I don't remember feeling anything other than tired, So, but he would often, I think you're right. Like looking at it now, I think he would pick fights with me to get attention. He would rub in the fact that he was getting attention elsewhere from women. And I would try to take care of him and coddle him a little bit, make his favorite meal or whatever. But he would still get angry, even though I was doing that, even though I was trying to include him. In my mind, we were parents and we had this project to work on and we were working on it together. That's not how he saw it. It was, you had a baby and I will help you. I will condescend to help you when you need it, And so, even after that, when we ended up going through the divorce, he claimed that he was the primary parent, even though he had never taken her to the doctor. He'd never made a doctor's appointment. He'd never tried to solve any of the problems that, new babies have or any of that. And it just, that was hard because it made me question. There were a lot of things that made me question whether or not I was a good mother. And still to this day, I don't feel like I'm a good mom because of some of that stuff.
So we mentioned that you're getting into fights with him, and now we're about to hear a story where animal abuse occurs. So walk us through this.
And so he came home from work and brought a cat with him. And this cat was clearly a semi-feral cat. So we started taking care of the cat. And at this time, I was going to the gym every morning before work. And I would come home and help him get my daughter ready for daycare and then go to work. And so I came home after the gym one morning and my daughter was upset, crying, and there was no cat. And so I walk in and I'm like, what's going on? And my daughter says, well, he kicked the cat. And I look at him and I'm like, well, what do you mean he kicked the cat? And it turns out that the cat had pooped in the living room. He tried to smear its nose in it, which is not how you discipline animals for pooping in the living room. And it had scratched him. So and this is according to him, so who knows if it was really worse than this, but he had thrown the cat against the wall. The cat kind of tried to run away and he grabbed it again, opened up the door and drop kicked it out the door. Sorry. All while my 1.5-year-old child watched. And at this point, the cat was gone. She was upset. So I focused on trying to comfort her, get her to daycare. I think I looked at him and said, I think I said something like, what the heck? What? My brain just could not compute this behavior. And I didn't hold him accountable more than that, other than just saying, that's not okay. That's all I said. And she still remembers that story. That's one of her earliest memories. So yeah, when I divorced him, one of the first things I did was foster kittens. So, and I have dogs now. I have 2 dogs now. So life is better on the other side, guys.
So from there, animal abuse has just happened. You're going through a lot and you eventually want to get pregnant again. And that is a big thing for you. And you think that he's on the same page. But this is when you find out that this is where a really big lie is occurring. So what happens here?
So this is the kind of story that when you tell it, you're like, I feel like I'm lying because it can't possibly be true. But during all this time with the pets and little waves of escalation, he would get angry and calm down, but nothing huge happened during this time while I was taking care of my daughter. We decided together that it was time to get pregnant again. I wanted my kids to be about 2 years apart if we could manage it. So my oldest is about 1.5 years. It was time to start thinking about getting pregnant again. And again, like you say, he was on the same page as far as I knew. And I was really concerned about only having one child because I didn't want her to be alone. So we started trying to have a baby. We tried. First month didn't work. I was like, okay, first month, can't expect the first month to work. Tried the second month and it didn't work. And I started getting a little worried because I had heard about secondary infertility. And so I was starting to worry that that was the case for us. We tried again another month, a third month, and still didn't get pregnant. And it was kind of odd because once we started trying to get pregnant with my first, it was pretty quick. And so I remember one night we were laying there in bed next to each other And finally, the thought just popped into my head, he's had a vasectomy. And I remember thinking, no. But at the same time, I knew. And I can't tell you how I knew. It was so out of left field and so outside of my experience and the way that I thought things worked. I don't know where that thought came from. But I laid there and I said, did you have a vasectomy? And I sat there in the silence for about 2 or 3 minutes. And finally he said, yes. And that was the moment that all of my intentions for my life, I mean, I'd already given up being happy in my marriage. I'd already given up pets. And now I wasn't going to have any more kids. That was going to be one and done. And so my life is crumbling. My hopes and dreams for life are crumbling around me. And what I did is I pushed all that down and I comforted him and told him that I loved him and that I was still going to be married to him. But then I thought that we needed to go back to counseling, go back to therapy. So we ended up going back into therapy. Throughout that process, things come out. He says that he got a vasectomy because he thought that my oldest child wasn't his. And he wanted to catch me cheating. And so he got a vasectomy before trying to have kids because he expected me to get pregnant anyway. And then he could say, haha, you couldn't be pregnant with me because I can't have kids anymore. Which just blew my mind. I am not a flirtatious person. I had a roommate once teach me how to flirt because I didn't know how. And I'm still not very good at it. And I mean, it just doesn't even occur to me to flirt with people generally. And so the fact that he was so convinced that I was cheating on him, that he went and had pretty invasive surgery, just, I couldn't compute that. I couldn't figure that out. But I put all that aside, like I said, comforted him. We did the therapy. He got out all of, I reassured him I wasn't cheating on him. And we worked out all of these problems. And so he said, and then so he came to me after therapy one time. He said, I've been thinking really hard about this. I think I'm going to get a reversal. And I had never pressured him. I'd never asked for it. I just assumed it was done. I didn't even know. I'm not sure I even knew reversals were possible. And he went and got his reversal. And then the minute that he was healed up from that he wanted to have sex. And we did. And then the minute that was over, that same night, as soon as it was over, he said, I'm moving out next week. And so, yeah. So that's how I ended up having my second child, getting pregnant with my second.
So you laughed there a little bit at the end, but what other people couldn't see is when you were telling this whole story, when you got to the point where, you resigned yourself that this is your life and I'm only going to have one child. You had tears in your eyes and you could see the pain on your face, or I could see the pain on your face of what you were dealing with, but how much you had lost who you were as a person at this point really shows, who you once were didn't exist anymore. This person that was this missionary, go-getter, doing what you're doing, all of a sudden, 3 years later, 3.5 years later, unrecognizable to the point where, you've resigned yourself to a specific life because of this person, and the hole was dug. It's a lot of pain that I can see. Just wanted to, for everyone who's listening, just wanted to, it's sometimes people can't see what I'm seeing, and your face said it all. And I just wanted to, I know there's a lot of people that are feeling this exact same way you're feeling right now telling this, but it's a pretty pointed stamp right there that this is like a bottom, for you. at this point of the relationship, as far as I've given up so much of myself, I don't exist anymore.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, I was nothing but a support for him and a support for my child. All of my energies were going towards that. And it happened in a way where even probably 10 years later, maybe a little more than that, just recently, I'm in therapy again. And my therapist asked, well, what do you want out of life? And I said, nothing. I still don't have any goals, don't have any purpose or plans for my life other than to just see my kids get graduated and become functioning adults, you know? And so I've been over the past few years trying to build something again, you know?
So that is a lot to deal with, and I'm sure many people in our community feel the same way as you do. But getting back to your story, your husband doesn't leave right away. Things are smoothed out, but not really for a bit. And now people are going to hear the part of the story where you start to push back.
Yeah.
How was that segue for you?
That was a good one. Yeah, I started to push back. So I think the first time I started pushing back, I don't even think I realized I was pregnant yet, but it was definitely within those first 3 months of pregnancy. He had different plans for his life throughout the marriage. He wanted to go back to school and get his bachelor's. He didn't know what he wanted to get it in. It would keep changing. And then he'd take a couple of classes. Like I remember he took remedial English and math. Then he just quit after those classes were over and didn't continue with his degree. And so it was just constantly something new that he wanted to do with his life. And shortly before this, he had decided that he wanted to get into a particular type of testing where you could go and take a year-long program, get certified, and make pretty good money. He wanted to do that. And so I was like, okay, great. This is actually a plan that could work for him. So I was all supportive about it. Well, within these first 3 months, he came to me and he said, you know what? I don't want to do this program anymore. He was in it, had been in it for a few months. I don't want to do this program anymore. I want to be a movie producer. It just didn't feel like something feasible. So I went to him and I said, I will support you if this is what you want to do in life. I'll be behind you all the way, but I cannot support you financially in this. So I think it's time for us to split our finances. And he didn't get upset at first. He was kind of a little angry about it maybe, but not a lot. And it was before work. So I said, okay, you know what? You think about this today and we'll circle back tonight and we'll talk about it. Anyway, so we never did circle back about it, but it was just a few days later. I had plans to go visit my uncle in the area. But at this point, I was 3 months pregnant and I was so nauseated that I was going to work, throwing up in the bathroom a couple times a day. and just trying to I was working with my head on my hands, just trying to stay focused. So I was pretty sick, and I was so sick that Sunday that I was like, I told him, I'm going to cancel with my uncle. I just stay home. But he had plans to watch movies that he didn't want to watch with me because I'm not into certain types of movies. And so I was like, don't worry about it. I'll just take my oldest and take her in the back, and I'll read stories to her until it's bedtime, and we won't even know we're here. You can watch whatever movies you want to watch. And so he didn't seem that angry about it yet. But I was in the kitchen feeding her. And when you're feeding a 2-year-old, you kind of strip them down, give them food, and they get all messy. And then you give them a bath and get them ready for bed. So she was stripped down, had food all over her face. And I was just feeding her different types of food at a time. Was going to pour her some milk. And he started getting angry. And I don't even remember what he was talking about. It was partially, I think he was upset that I had changed my mind, but that's not what he was talking about at the time. And then it started getting into this, it started segueing into him being angry at me, and came at me with his hands up. And my daughter was sitting in between us in the kitchen. So she was kind of to the side. He started coming towards me, and the look in his eyes was just flat. Like, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a total stranger, you know? And I had this feeling, I was like, he's going to hit me and she's going to see it. So it was almost like something took over me, because up until this point, I had always been very trying to reconcile with him, trying to calm things down. And I had been talking calmly to him and trying to calm things down. But when he came at me, it was like something else took over me. And I stepped towards him and I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to hit me? Break my stuff again? Break something I care about? Because if you're going to hit me, do it right here. And I pointed at my cheek and turned my face to him. And he looks at me with that look in his eyes, and I could see the gears turning in his face. And he realized that there would be consequences if he hurt me. And so he hit the milk jug out of my hand. It flew across the room and slammed into the wall. And I still remember, one of the few things I remember from that night is the milk dripping down the wall of the kitchen. And then he ordered me out of the house, grabbed me around the waist, started dragging me out towards the front door. We get all the way up to the door, and I put my hand on the side of the door, and he could not hold on to me and open the door at the same time. And so he lets me go. And it's at this point that I realize that my daughter is screaming in her high chair. And so I run to go take care of her. And he moves over to, my guitar was leaning up against the couch because I was trying to learn how to play guitar. And he kicked the guitar and started ranting and raging. And I went over to my daughter. I said, it's okay. It'll be okay. And calming her down, started getting her out of the high chair and cleaning her up. And he came over to, and I said, Daddy's just mad. It'll be okay. And he came over and was like, how dare you say that to her? And started getting more and more angry. And so I cleaned her up. I'm like, okay, we'll just leave. My thought was, we'll just leave the house. You can have the house. It's not worth this. So I go into her room and start collecting her clothes together. And I start hearing him screaming at her and telling her, your mommy's a liar. Your mommy's a hypocrite. She's a whore. She sleeps with all these other men. She's a monster. And I just sink down. I remember this really, really vividly. I sink down inside her closet, and I'm curled up in her closet with her clothes in my hand, just crying. And all of a sudden I hear her say, Mommy is not a monster. Daddy's a monster. Daddy, go to timeout. And I got terrified that he was going to do something to her because she was being so feisty. So I come back out. I start getting her dressed. Somehow in the middle of all of this, he'd gotten his dinner because he was sitting there eating his dinner, kept ranting about me being a cheater. I was a crappy wife. I don't even know what all he was saying. I just went blank in my head at this point. And so I'm trying to get her ready to go. And he said, basically, you are not taking her out of the house if that I'm her father and I have as much say as you do about what happens to her. So I was like, okay. I sit down on the couch and I'm just staring at a spot on the floor while he rants. And she starts running around the house. Just imagine this little 2-year-old in her princess outfit running around the house. She's got these measuring cups in this kitchen that I got her. So she's like mixing things together in the measuring cups and bringing one to me and saying, look, Mommy, taste this. And look, Daddy, taste that. So she's running back and forth between us, trying to, in her 2-year-old way, calm things down. So I'm just, trying to play with her, but I'm dissociated. It's like I'm watching it happen. I'm not actually there. And he starts packing. He finishes his meal. he starts packing all of his stuff, throwing it on the chair and bringing it out to his truck and coming in and out. And the door's wide open. So I'm having to try to keep her from leaving and keep her occupied. And he finally just leaves. And I'm sitting there on the couch. She's snuggled up to me, hugging me, and trying to talk to me, I think, about what was happening. And I probably said something to her. I have no idea. But he had tracked in a bunch of leaves and dirt onto we had white, kind of cream colored carpets. And so there was this big patch of black on the carpet. And I was just staring at it. And all of a sudden, it was like that patch of black was everything wrong in my life. And so I get down on my hands and knees, grab cleaner, get down on my hands and knees, and I start trying to scrub it, and it's not coming out. And I just start shaking all over. And it's like, again, I'm not really in my own mind. So my body is shaking, but I'm not feeling anything. And so I try to call my brother because he was close by. He doesn't pick up. I try to call my mom, and instead of my mom picking up, my dad picks up. And I start trying to tell him what was happening. I don't think I strung coherent words together at all. But apparently I communicated enough because he said, you need to call 911. And I said, no, I can't call 911. He'll be mad. And he was like, well, is he coming back? And I said, I don't know. And he basically said, he goes, if you don't call 911, I will. And that kind of snapped me back into my body because I am very not okay with other people taking responsibility for things I'm supposed to take responsibility for. So I call 911. Found out later in the meantime, my dad actually tries to call 911 remotely. It's really hard to call 911 for a place that you don't live in because they were not local. But he does that. He calls my uncle. Anyway, I get on 911. They stay on the phone with me until they come because they were asking, is he coming back? Are there any weapons in the house? And that was the first time I remember them asking that because I was like, oh my goodness. Like it just suddenly felt so real when they asked that. They show up and they couldn't have been there more than 5 minutes when he comes back. And so I've got a couple cop cars in my yard. I have no idea what's happening. I'm hiding back in the laundry room. They've given me paperwork to fill out. So I'm trying to write down everything that happened on this paperwork. I'm flushed and red and probably full of tears. My daughter's running around who knows where because she sometimes comes back, but sometimes she's out there. And then I hear that he's come back. And so the cops are outside on the front talking to him. I have no idea what happened during that. All I know is that one of the police officers comes in and says to his buddy, the other officer, he says, if I stay out there, he's going to talk himself into jail. And I remember that because that also terrified me. I didn't want him to go to jail. That thought hadn't even occurred to me, just like it didn't occur to me to call 911. And so, anyway, the rest of that night was pretty chaotic. I had neighbors coming over checking on me because they saw the police officers. I had my brother show up and so I do know that my brother showed up and he got angry that my brother was there and forbade him from coming onto the property. So the police officers asked my brother to leave. I guess my dad had gotten a hold of him at some point, asked him to leave. So my brother leaves. So I'm feeling like I don't have any real protection because my brother's gone. My uncle shows up later. So it was just a circus. And during all of this, the officer that told me he was going to talk himself into jail comes and sits down next to me and says, asked me more details about what had happened. And he says, we have this program called victim reparations. And that was the first time I was like, victim reparations? Like, what are you talking about? I didn't even connect the dots that I was a victim, And I was like, oh, no, it's fine. And he goes, well, here's the paperwork anyway. You should fill it out because you might need it later. I mean, this guy was savvy. He knew his business. And I know people say all cops are bad, but I cannot. And I agree, there's a lot of problems in our police force. But this guy has saved my life. So he ends up getting the victim reparations handler to come and talk to me. She lets me know of all these resources and things like that. And my brother ends up coming back, and he sleeps on my couch that night because I couldn't sleep alone. So that was the night that my husband left me.
And from here, a lot of things happen.
Yeah.
So you go to file for a temporary protection order is one thing. And during this process, you're finding out that he's been siphoning money rather than paying bills. He's forged tax returns. You have several months of bills to pay. And, the church ends up giving you food for a month to help you kind of get back on your feet. And you find out he stole your tax return. So you ended up filing and reporting him for fraud because of this. He's trying to paint you as someone who's mentally unstable.
Yeah.
And that will end up being a thing as far as custody and time with kids as well going on in the future. You try to do therapy, and within therapy and the temporary protective order, you find out about something that you call the binder of blame.
The binder of blame. Oh, yes. That became a thing. So apparently our entire marriage, I knew he had a binder of information. In the binder that he had that I knew about, he had like his previous wedding and divorce paperwork. It's just kind of the binder that you have of all your paperwork, and he showed it to me at one point. That's when I found out that he actually had a previous child that he had never been in contact with. And so it shouldn't have been a surprise to me, but it was, because it was in therapy that he brought. It was a 3 or 4 inch binder. It's huge. And it was full of printouts of chats and blog posts that I had made. I don't even know what else. He didn't show me most of it. He only showed me a few things in there. But for example, one of the things he had was he had a printout. I don't know if any of you who are listening remember ICQ. It was an instant messaging app. And that's how I was talking to most of my friends that I had met online. And I'd had an ICQ chat that was from 3 years before all this happened, where I was talking to my friend and had said, so we were talking, I was telling him that I wasn't allowed to talk to him anymore, that I couldn't talk to him anymore. And he said, well, why? And I said, because my husband thinks that I'm cheating on him. And he said, that's not you. You would never do that. And I just kind of offhand said, well, you know me better than my husband then. And that was his big proof that I was emotionally cheating on him, was that I said to my friend that my friend knew me better than my husband did. That was his biggest proof.
And you brought up ICQ there. Can you do the noise that it makes? How does the message sound go? Uh-oh. Yeah, that's the sound. That's the sound I'm thinking of.
Uh-oh, that was the best sound in the world. For those of you who didn't live in this era, the uh-oh was a happy sound.
If my cousin is currently listening, she'll really appreciate that one part.
ICQ was great. That was a great era for computing, man.
So from this point, you've done the therapy aspect of things with him. He's supposed to pay support. He doesn't pay support. And this is when you file for divorce. And, this is where custody becomes a big issue, and where, you want full custody. You
Right.
know what he's capable of. You know how he might be manipulative towards the children. And this becomes a big, the next big part of your life. And we're going to do our best here to kind of sum a lot of these. So, there's so much that happens. I mean, if for everyone's listening, we could have a 10-hour podcast on what has gone on. But we're talking about someone who is the ultimate counter parent. No matter what you want, they're going to counter it in any sort of way. They're using the children. They manipulate the children to really just get back at you. And again, he wants to be the center of everyone's world. And that also means that they're an extension of him as well. And that's how he views them. So, what are, I guess, the biggest things that are going on with his counter-parenting, and how is this affecting your children?
Yeah. So early on, I think he thought even after everything that we were going to get back together. And in fact, I know he did. Going back over I had forgotten about this, but going back over my journal entries, he was constantly swinging back and forth from accusing me of being a lying, manipulative cheater to when are we going to get back together? In fact, the one email in particular that I read was kind of interesting. He had been floating around to different apartments, and he's like, well, I can't find a stable home for my child, for our child. And that's a requirement of him to get visitation, was to have a home that she could sleep in. And so he said, I can't find one unless I sign a lease. And there's no point in me signing a lease if we're going to get back together. So are we going to get back together or not? And going back and reading that now, I mean, this is the kind of stuff he would do. He was never, very rarely, a huge, like, blow up, fascinating thing. It was just a constant drip of subtle manipulation that I didn't realize was happening until all of this. But by this time, I actually could see through it. I had started reading But He Never Hit Me by Jill Murray. And then I read from that, I started reading Lindy Bancroft and started reading a bunch of other books about narcissistic abuse. There weren't that many resources at the time. It's not like now where you can pull up and there's all these support groups and resources and things you can get. It really wasn't that well known. But anyway, so I started getting kind of savvy to some of these patterns of manipulation. But I filed for divorce. So first I filed for the temporary restraining order because he had threatened to take my daughter away, and he had threatened to burn the house down. And so I got the temporary. For people who haven't been through this, they'll issue a temporary restraining order really easily. Basically, you just go in there, fill out paperwork, and you get 30 days. In order to have that made a permanent protective order, or semi-permanent protective order, you have to go into a hearing where they'll hear from him, they'll hear from you, and then they may or may not issue a protective order. When I did that, I don't know if it's the DA. I'm sure there's lawyer people that know better about how this is all very new to me. I had no idea. I'd never had a court situation in my life. I had no idea what was going on. I just showed up to the hearing. They had a prosecutor of some kind or a lawyer of some kind who was on my side. He had hired a lawyer, and the lawyer came in and told me, I never got a chance to actually talk to her before stuff happened. They actually went in there to talk to the judge without me first or something. It was weird. And then she comes back and she goes, just so you know, if you don't drop this protective order, you will lose custody of your kids. And so I ended up dropping it, and they instituted a parenting plan, a visitation plan, minimal visitation. So he ended up getting minimal visitation on a temporary basis. And so I started having to arrange with him to come see the oldest, to have her some of the time. When the youngest was born, he would come and see her in the house with my mom there. I would make myself scarce and he would come see her. Oh, also during this time, he was sneaking into the house and moving things around. So I would come home and things would be different. And it was kind of messing with my head because I didn't realize until later that he was sneaking into the house. So I had a friend's husband come and change the locks. And so I was starting, and my back door was basically tissue paper. So my dad replaced the back door. I was kind of starting to make this little bit of a fortress of our house because he kept doing things this whole time. He would send me nasty emails. I got very good at scanning over an email without reading it and picking out the important bits and only responding to the things I had to respond to. And in this whole thing, he would play these little games. Like, he filed a police report that I had hired 3 Polynesian men to jump him and beat him up. And he actually went into a D&D session with my brother and had bruises on him. I don't know how he got the bruises. I don't know what was going on. And then he later in court accused my dad of doing it because my dad is a military man, and you know how military men are. And so he would just play these little games all the time. And I ended up hiring a lawyer. We went in for what was supposed to be the temporary custody hearing. And my lawyer was like, this is not a big deal. This is just a 15-minute hearing. They will institute temporary visitation, and that's it. We sat there for over 2 hours while his lawyer brought up all these things. He accused me, if you can think of it, he accused me of it. He accused me of cheating on him. He said he wasn't even sure the kids were his. And then he said, well, I guess the oldest is definitely mine. She looks like me. So, but I don't think the youngest is. He wanted them to order me to pay for a paternity test. Luckily, the judge looked at me and was like, do you have any doubt who the dad is? And I was like, no. And so he looked at my ex and said, if you want a paternity test, you have to pay for it. That was the only one I got in the whole hearing. He ordered me to start calling him because I had insisted on email only communication, and I didn't want to share my phone number with him. I had a new phone, and so he got the judge to order me to share my phone number. It was terrifying. Everything that I had done to try to protect myself, I was ordered not to do. But yeah, from the very beginning, it was like he was playing this complicated war game where everybody else were chess pieces and I was his enemy, and he wanted to hurt me. That was it. That was his goal with everything that he did. And once I started realizing that, I was able to anticipate what he was going to do and counter it without playing the game. And that's what I've been doing for the last 15 years, is trying to protect my kids and take care of them and not let him drag them into the game. But there were several times that he did anyway.
And if you could describe your exhaustion in one sentence, what would that be?
Never ending. As one word. There were times that he would let off for a while and things would be going well. And I would start to kind of rebuild myself. It happened probably 2 or 3 times where I was like, wow, I'm happy. And then something major would happen. There's like you said, there's so many things that I could talk about, but I think the worst of it is oftentimes my kids would come home with an injury of some kind. But there was one point where it was actually early on. She was about 3 years old, and she came to me and she said that she saw somebody's tail. And I was confused because I had taught her appropriate words for genitalia, but she was saying that, and I'm like, where are you getting this from? I didn't say that to her. I just thought that. But then he came to me and said that she had told him that her babysitter's husband, who she was no longer with this babysitter. She was in a care center at this point, a child care center, but that he had made her suck him. And so I did end up calling CPS about that and submitting a report, but he filmed her. He sent me a video where he was pressuring her to say those things, and she was clearly uncomfortable and not wanting to say it on camera. So I sent that to CPS, and they didn't do anything about that. They investigated it a little bit, but nothing ever came from that.
So he was telling her to tell stories about the husband?
Yeah, he was like, so say what happened. Say what happened. And she said something else. And he's like, no, say that, tell what happened with your babysitter's husband. And she was like, oh, well, he's nice. And he was like, no, tell about, so he was leading her. So in the years since, my oldest is almost 18 now. And within the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of stuff has come out since she started going over to her dad. One of the things that came out was that he would come in and check on them naked, or she walked in on him taking care of himself and invited her in to come look at it and touch it. So I think that he was leading her to accuse that to cover his tracks. So that if she said anything about sexual abuse, it would sound like it was the babysitter's husband and not him. So that's what I think.
And how are your kids doing now?
That's a good question. So my kids are very different. The way that he interacted with them was very much the golden child and scapegoat dichotomy. My oldest was his golden child, and my youngest was his scapegoat. And I think a lot of times people think that being a golden child is actually better. I can tell you it isn't always. He would sit her down and lecture her about father's rights and conspiracy theories. He would parentify her, sexualize her. There was definitely some sexual abuse that happened. What exactly, even she isn't entirely sure. She ended up reporting that to the authorities a few years ago, and they did an investigation on that. And CPS found it to be substantiated, but they didn't pursue it legally. They didn't prosecute him for it. But she has been, and I'm saying she because she gave me permission to, but they're actually trans. I asked them if they'd be okay with me talking about them with their birth gender when I talked about them because, at the time, because it makes more sense and gives the framework for it. But they're transgender. They've gone through a lot of defining phases. We had a hard time right after she left her dad. They would pick fights. She wasn't a they yet, but they would pick fights with me over a lot of different things. And luckily we kind of got through that, but I made sure that they got a LGBTQ friendly therapist. We're just kind of taking it one day at a time. They're almost an adult. They've got plans for their life, which there for a while was not a thing for them. And so I'm really proud of them. They have been fighting really hard to find out who they are through all of the abuse and the intense enmeshment that he put on them. My youngest, I don't talk about as much because it's been less of a problem. She is very observational. She likes to see what other people are doing, and she learns from that. My oldest is a standing inside the fire kind of person. So it's been quite the ride. But my youngest wants to be a pediatric oncologist. They have anxiety and OCD tendencies, but they're working through some of that, and they're both just doing amazing. I've tried so hard. I really wanted them to have a lot of adult resources like therapists and teachers and things like that besides just me, because I was the enemy for a long time in their lives. They were taught that I was the enemy, and I wanted to make sure that they had people they could go to with stuff. So.
And how are you dealing with everything, the healing process and the aftermath here?
That's a good question. My favorite movie says there are no happy endings because nothing ends. And I think that pretty much sums up where I am right now.
What movie is that?
The Last Unicorn. A lot of people won't watch it because it's about unicorns, but I'm telling you, go watch it. It is an amazing movie and an even better book. So I am dealing, I'm in therapy and have been for a while, again, and I'm on medication right now. It hasn't fixed everything. If anyone's considering going on medication, I'm not going to say you should or you shouldn't, but I was kind of against it because I always figured I could handle it. I can handle my life. But when I got to the point where I realized that I was driving down the street and fantasizing about driving off a cliff, that I needed more help than I was getting. So I went and talked with my doctor, my primary, and she screened me and prescribed a very mild, what is it called? It's escitalopram. I don't even know what that's called. But anyway, SSRI. There we go. Very mild SSRI. And it kind of just numbed everything. It made it so that I still felt happy, but not for very long. I still felt sad, but not for very long. And it's given me a space in which I can work through who I am and what I believe in and who I want to be. Because pretty soon my kids are going to be adults and my life isn't their life. And I need to be ready to have my life again. So I'm getting there. I'm kind of starting to become feisty again. But it's a more pick your battles feistiness. I don't fight over everything that I think is wrong, just the really important stuff, and throwing myself into all my hobbies, and life is good. Life is good.
And if you had any words of wisdom for everyone listening today, what would they be?
First of all, don't try to co-parent with a narcissist. There's a thing called parallel parenting and gray rock. And gray rock is a long game. It doesn't work right away, but I was able to get him to leave me alone within about 4 or 5 years. It is gold. And when you gray rock somebody that you have to communicate with, it's not, you can't go no contact because you're legally required to contact this person. You can't even go low contact exactly sometimes, but you can gray rock. And it's basically just a matter of not reflecting back their energy. Treat them as if they are a tax auditor. That's kind of how I think about it. You have to do business with them. Keep it to business alone. Don't let any emotions. It's hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to learn how to do, but it pays off. If you can manage to just take your emotions out of it, get a therapist, get friends, get your parents, get your siblings, vent to them. Do not draw in the ex or anyone who knows them. And if you have to communicate with them, well, first of all, don't communicate with them unless you have to. And if you have to communicate with them, keep it short and emotionless, and it will eventually pay off.
Well, Donalda, thank you for being here with me today and sharing your story. You did a tremendous job. You really did. We got into the nitty-gritty of your feelings, the lows and how that felt. And you gave people language today, and I think you gave people hope. I know people at the end there heard like it's going to take 5 years on this thing, but we're speaking in reality here.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, this is going to be your reality, and you're not giving them a false hope at all. You're just giving the straight truth of what you were dealing with, what they're dealing with, and you're not sugarcoating it. And that's the way to do it. And, when you get to my age, people older than me, time starts moving fast. So even though at the time it might seem like you're stuck in it, but, you went through a lot and many different types of abuses, and you lost yourself, and you're finding your way back. And in that process, being a parent for 2 kids where there was like a fight going on for, your children, and you did a really good job doing that. And, you sacrificed yourself in so many ways. And I think everyone here is really happy that you are here, that you're alive, and that you're going to be looking forward to the next part of your life, and that you get to live it for you.
Yeah.
And just a really big thank you for being here today and sharing and doing it with a sense of humor and laughs. And you let me stick in my 2-cent comments here or there. So thank you. And just a really big thank you. And everyone's giving you a big hug right now.
Thank you. And thank you for giving people a forum to speak. I think it's so important that those of us who have been through things say something about it, because anyone who hasn't been through it needs to understand. And anyone who has needs to feel heard and like they're not alone. So thank you.
If you see something, say something. And thank you very much to Donalda today for saying something. I can't thank you enough for being here with us today. And if you want to be a guest like Donalda was today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, there's a button that says guest form. When you click on that button, it takes you to our guest form page. And there you can read all of our instructions and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button. And please do send it in the format that we ask for. And if you are someone that needs support, we have a support group at our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Click the support group button at the top of the page, and you'll see that we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. We have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation you need from survivors just like you. It's a wonderful group of people on there, so if you need support, join our support group today. And if you need even more support, please do visit our friends at domesticshelters.org. At domesticshelters.org, they have articles and resources to help you make sense of what you are going through. They have every phone number, email address, and web address for shelters and agencies, no matter how big or small the town you are from. Domesticshelters.org has it there. It is a wonderful organization, so please do go to domesticshelters.org if you need more support. And we have another friend of the show called Shelter Movers, and Shelter Movers can be found at sheltermovers.com. And Shelter Movers helps you get everything out of your home and into storage. If you're going through domestic violence, coercive control, they help you get everything out of your home and into storage. That goes for your pets and livestock too. It is only in Canada right now. It is a charitable organization. You can donate to them. So if you need help from them or just want to donate to them, go to sheltermovers.com. And that is it for today's survivor story. So for myself and Donalda, we hope you have a good night.